There we go. So now people actually come into the conversation. Jim, if you want to invite any of your followers. So
I don't even know. I'm sorry, Amy. I don't even know how to do that.
You
I'm
just
so
tweet the link. Oh, you know what?
seriously.
You retweet me. That's how you can do it. You would just retweet me. I added you just now.
So I go on Twitter. Is that what I do? I go on Twitter and
Yeah, you go to Twitter and then you just retweet where I tagged you. You just retweet that one.
okay, hold on a sec. Um, I'm
There's
on Twitter now.
actually a couple people in the stream already. Hello, everybody. We do have some guests.
I I don't want to ruin your show, so I don't want to press anything and lose you. So I'll just stay here.
Okay, there we go.
Seriously, I am so technically illiterate. I don't want to do anything to mess this up, so I'll just
No
stay
problem.
right here.
I'm changing my lighting too. Now I look very tan. Okay, let's go. So we are waiting for Derek Sells is supposed to be joining us, but I don't see him just yet. So I think we could get started. So I really wanted to focus on solutions. I think there's a lot of talk of past transgressions by people or unfairness or lack of diversity. I feel like we can accept that as pretty much fact at this point. And let's talk
Right.
about how can we solve that problem. So first of all, let me play your question from yesterday because I think it's important for people to understand that context. I'm going to try to share the screen. While I do, Nick, did you want to say anything about his question yesterday, Roger Goodell? Did you happen to see it? I don't mean to put you.
Yeah, I saw it. And Jim, amazing question. I don't know if the question was actually answered, but great question. Because obviously we know what's taking place in the NFL when it comes to coaches and minority hires. And I think you elaborated on that question and expanded going into the front office and the media. So I would like to see what's going to actually happen from Commissioner Goodell's standpoint, because we know that he works for the owners and he might not feel the same way that they do, but will he have enough influence to change their mind? That's what I'm waiting to see what's going to happen.
Well, Nick, I don't know that he has the power to influence or change their minds, but there are things that he can do on his level where he has the power in terms of hiring, and that is at the league office and even at the NFL media group where I am. You know, it's telling that at the league office, you know, when I looked up the top 11 executives, there's the executive vice presidents, the commissioner, the COO, those things. Of those 11 people, only 2 are people of color. And then obviously I work at NFL Media Group, where we cover a league whose player population is 70% Black or above. And yet at the senior level in the newsroom where decisions are made about how these men are being covered, there is not one black person at the table. And that is not to say that the people that I work for are somehow racist or, you know, trying to put people or players in a bad light. It's just that for me, in any newsroom, you want a representative sample at the decision-making level of the community that you're covering, because there are certain life experiences, et cetera, that those individuals can bring to the conversation. And we don't have that at the network. And obviously at the league office, there is still work to be done at the highest level in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
But Jim, I thought this was really interesting, and you can kind of shed some light on this. But with you being an individual that works for the NFL by way of NFL Network, how does this affect you in any way, being able to ask some of these tough questions that we all wanted answers to?
I don't know. And truthfully, Nick, I don't worry about that. You know, look, I'm 58 years old. I've been doing this a while, and I feel like I've earned the credibility to be able to um, not be fearful of consequence. You know, when you're younger in this business, and I won't speak for anyone else, I'll speak for myself. Even I experienced some of this when I'm young. When you're starting out, you're trying to find your way. You don't have a foundation of work that allows you to go into certain areas that are uncomfortable, and you're looking for validation. And then as you start to progress a little bit and you have families and you have kids and those sorts of things, you become concerned about your livelihood, particularly if, let's say, you're the only breadwinner in the family. And so sometimes there's this old saying that you kind of go along to get along. And I'm not saying that it was that, but I'm saying that there was some of that where you understand where your place is and how far you can go. But I feel like now, again, at 58, I've reached a point where I'm getting closer to retirement age, and I've done fairly well for myself. And so I feel like it is incumbent on me, particularly after what I saw in terms of how Colin Kaepernick was treated, that I give a platform to those who can't speak for themselves. And that means these coaches, these executives, personnel people who aspire to climb the ladder, these minority coaches, personnel people, executives, that I give them a platform to be able to say what maybe they can't say, or if they want to say it, I can give them that platform. And really, as I go forward in my career, whatever time I have left, that is really what I'm all about now, is trying to give a voice to the people who don't have a voice or who were voiceless. And hopefully, when I'm out of this, that this business, that hopefully it's in a better place, than it was before I left.
Oh, come on, Jim. You've got many more years left in you.
No, I don't know about that. It's
Don't act
look,
like
I'm
you're
not.
out that door.
No,
That would be a tremendous loss.
no, I'm not lying to you. It's hard. I've got a story. I thought it was going to post yesterday, and it didn't. So I'm hopeful it'll post today regarding this Brian Flores situation, and in it I explore, you know, is this moment is the lawsuit from Brian Flores going to be a moment in time that grabs headlines, or is it going to be a movement that produces substantive change? And one of the answers to that, I said, is whether or not more coaches are going to join on to the lawsuit. But in telling that, and to answer that question before we go on, I don't know if more are going to join. The ones that I've talked to over the last week are still uncertain. They're still reviewing the lawsuit. They're weighing how it will impact them, all those sorts of things. So I don't want to sit here and act like I have the answer to that. But in it, I also explore the story that's not being talked about, and that's the mental toll that this situation takes on these coaches and these minorities. So, for instance, I reached out to Clarence Shellman, who was a former running backs coach with the Cowboys, or with the Seahawks, Cowboys, and Chargers. He coached Emmitt Smith. He coached LaDainian Tomlinson. He was an offensive coordinator with the Chargers for 5 years. They went to the playoffs 3 times. He didn't call plays, but he designed the run game, and he ran all of the offensive meetings. Well, he never got one interview for a head coaching job. And he saw people with less qualified resumes not only get interviews, but get jobs. And it got to the point that it was taking such a toll on his psyche, he walked away from the game a decade ago. And so I asked him, and he wanted to speak on the record because obviously he's out of it. He doesn't have to worry about retribution. And I said to him, can you explain to an outsider like me or others who think this really isn't a big deal what toll this takes on you as someone who works your ass off for your entire adult life to try and climb that ladder, and then you get to that point where you're just below becoming a head coach and you can't take that final step? And he said to me, and it's almost a direct quote, he said, it's emasculating. And he said, it's devastating. And he told me, I've been out of it for a decade, and it stays with you. It doesn't leave you. So as the league talks about the importance of mental health and protecting your mental health and whatnot, I don't think these owners or the league is really considering what toll this discrimination is taking on these men who are simply trying to get an equal opportunity. That's all they want, is an opportunity. No one is asking to be given anything. They are saying that we believe we have earned the right to have an opportunity to either succeed or fail on our own merits. And that's all it's supposed to be about.
May I also add women into the mix? I don't know what the complementary term would be for emasculating, but I guess it would be the opposite of that.
But see, can I say this, Amy? Can I say this real quick? I think there's a dangerous game that gets played too by the league when it talks about diversity. And what happens is they use women, particularly white women, as a tool in terms of the percentage to say, look at our diversity percentage. And what that does is that minimizes the real negative numbers about these black coaches and black men within the game who are trying to climb that ladder. And that's not in any way to say that white women shouldn't have an opportunity to climb the ladder or reach the highest levels of their profession. It's simply to say, I think when you look at the numbers by the demographics, it's really telling who is being hurt most by what's going on in the NFL.
Well, I'm a white woman, right? But when I say women, I mean any woman, really. And
Right.
and we should also talk about the possibility, because I do feel a responsibility as a woman to inject this into the conversation of what if a woman, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, doesn't matter, wants to head coach a team in the NFL. That should be a possibility, right? So if you think
Absolutely.
about it from that standpoint, why should we have to wait 10, 20, 30 years to push for that movement? I'll just bring it up right now. Now, do I want to coach an NFL team? No, I have no desire to do that. But this platform is a perfect example. I've been working in the sports industry now for 10 years, but I've been a reporter for 20 years. I had to create my own platform to be able to get the opportunity, despite myself having a law degree, having the title of being a legal analyst across 3 major networks and being syndicated nationwide, to be able to do the journalism and the reporting that and talk about the issues that I think are important. I had to create my own startup to do that. There were no opportunities to do that within the mainstream media, despite my articles or my reporting, scooping other male reporters or getting tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of views. That doesn't mean that I would get an opportunity over, let's say, like a 20-year-old male who will just take less money. I mean, that's a part of it too, So this is not about me, but I do think it's important, just like in a broader sense, to see that like you're right. It can be, I can speak to it personally, it can be extremely frustrating. You're working hard, you're qualified for something, and just because of your gender or your race, you're not getting that opportunity. Not only not getting the opportunity when you're measured against people who have the same credentials, but that people who have lesser credentials and are less qualified and work less hard are getting those opportunities ahead of you, when it's so clear that your resume completely demolishes anything that they've accomplished or worked for in their life. So anyway, back to solutions. I mean, I love the idea of objective criteria. I'm curious what you all have to say about that, because I think it's something at least that's measurable.
No, I agree with you 100% on that, which is why I've said, first off, I always say this. I remember last year when I was working on this story about Eric Bieniemy and Byron Leftwich, who were, the two offensive coordinators in the Super Bowl last year. And prior to the game, I wanted to talk to them about solutions, potential solutions and whatnot. And I'll never forget Byron Leftwich said to me, why do I have to have a solution to a problem I didn't create? And he's absolutely right. Having said that, if we don't try and come up with some sort of solutions, I'm not expecting these owners to come up with a solution. So having said that, I would like to find objective ways to measure the hiring process and the interview process. So what do I mean by that? Tony Dungy said to me, owners have no idea how to hire a head coach. They don't know what they're looking for. Whenever they come to him, they always say, we just want the hot guy. We want the guy who's going to win, whatever. And he would ask them, what does that look like? And they don't have an answer. So my thing is, then how about we create this formula? Before an owner ever sits down with a candidate and does an interview, that owner, he or she, must list what they are looking for in a head coach. Do you want someone with previous experience or not? Do you want someone younger or older? Do you want someone on the offensive side, defensive side, special teams? Are you interested in position coaches? Do you want a delegator? Do you want someone who's hands-on? Put all of that down on a piece of paper in terms of what your vision is for what you want in that person. And then begin your interview process. And once you get to the end of that process, whoever you hire, then go back to that list and see how many boxes did you actually check in terms of, does this person meet your vision for that job? And if that person does, more power to you. But if that person doesn't, then there's a problem here. And we need to know why you went away from everything that you said you were looking for. You went in another direction. We need you to explain that to us. And to me, that at least helps us have an objective conversation about why Coach X didn't get the job versus Coach Y.
What about personality, though? I mean, anyone can weigh in, and I welcome Derek. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. You're the managing partner of the Johnnie Cochran firm, and I know Johnnie was a mentor, and we'll get into shortly about his study and how influential it was. But I'm just curious, the personality aspect of hiring. I mean, obviously, even in any corporate environment, the importance of somebody being a good fit within an organization, part of a team. I mean, obviously that's so subjective. So are there any solutions as to how to handle that, compounded with the fact that I don't know whose fault it is, but I feel like there's misunderstanding sometimes, maybe on both sides of the aisle, maybe sometimes only one side of the aisle, depending on, just like, you have to take into account cultural differences. And this could be, by the way, it doesn't have to be a Black person with a white person. It could be, a white person that was raised in a impoverished community and a Black coach that was, or a Black owner or something that was raised in an affluent community. It could be really anything that sort of impacts the way two people grew up totally different in their environments and their ability to understand that other person, work with that other person, and get the best out of that person.
Yeah, well, if from a legal standpoint, when you're talking about objective versus subjective criteria, improving our civil rights case, that's exactly what Mr. Flores has pointed out in his lawsuit. If you take a close look at the complaint that's been filed in this case, that's exactly what he's done. He's talked about historically how coaches who are white are treated differently than those who are Black. You take, for example, the situation with the Detroit Lions, and how they did not have a successful head coach really for many years. And when you had a Black coach there recently who knocked it out of the park for the Lions, who had won a Super Bowl with Colts, he got fired after only 4 years. And if you look at some of the other coaches who the Lions brought in, you could see how there's disparate treatment. And when you go about trying to prove race discrimination and its impact on head coaches in the NFL, for example, that's part of this complaint. And if this case is able to proceed, go forward, and there's discovery done, that's what the fact finders are going to be looking at. How do you compare objective versus subjective, right? Objective applies to everything. There's now a 17-game season, used to be a 16-game season. You look at what the records are, or you look at who the coaches were during those seasons, you look at the personnel during those seasons, and you could see how there's a significant difference between the way Black coaches are treated and white coaches.
Jim, before you go on, Derek, you have 2 screens up. You may have your cell phone or some other thing connected. So I'm hearing a little echo if you want to work on it. But Jim, did you have anything to say about my question about how we sort of help people understand each other better so that they can work together despite...
Well, I think... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I just said despite differences, how we can all work together. That's the point, right?
Well, part of it begins with getting to know people, and owners have to find a way to get to know these coaches. Now, it used to be there was a time back where at the owners' meetings, the owners would have like a breakfast, and you would bring in, there would be minority coaches there who, would be able to just sort of pick their brain, have a conversation with them, that sort of thing. But what's happened in recent years, and particularly in light of the COVID years, that hasn't happened. You look at the owners' meetings now when they're in person, and they've been reduced by a day because these owners are getting their business done and they're flying out. So there has to be an effort on the part of the owners to want to get to know these minority candidates or coaches as people, and not just as coaches or names on a piece of paper. And look, many of these coaches don't share the same background, culturally, socially, economically, whatever, as these owners. So I'm not expecting anyone to come to common ground and say, we all understand each other fully. But what I am saying is you can get to know what a person is about. And in vetting these coaches, you need to talk to as many people that they have worked with about what they are about and who they are and whether or not they fit the profile, the personality profile that you want. And that's why I said earlier, if you're putting down a list of traits that you want in a coach, again, do you want someone who is a delegator? Or do you want someone who's hands-on? Do you want someone who can be the face of your franchise in terms of that CEO vision that John Mara talked about with Joe Judge? Or do you not care about that and you simply want someone who knows how to teach and lead men? So there's not an easy answer to that as it relates to personality, because as was just said, that's subjective. It's not objective. So, but I think what would help is if these owners took the time and made the investment to really get to know these men before their names are ever mentioned, as a candidate for a head coaching opening.
Jim, if I may, Jim, I want to ask you a question because you brought up two names, Byron Leftwich and Eric Bieniemy. And the one thing that I continue to hear about Eric Bieniemy and the why the why as to he hasn't been hired is based on the fact that, one, he doesn't call plays. Two, they look at his troubled past when he was here in Denver as a member of the CU Buffs football team as to reasons as to why. And the biggest other why, the third why, is the fact that he's ill-prepared and he doesn't go and approach the interviews like a professional. In the circle that you run in, have you heard those same things? Because here in Denver, as a member of the Fan, I constantly hear either my colleagues or my colleagues on other stations repeat that same rhetoric over and over again. Is there any truth to that?
I'm so sick of hearing it.
Yeah.
And I'm just being as candid as I can be. I am sick of hearing that. What does it mean he didn't interview well? I saw Dan Campbell of the Detroit Lions get up in a press conference, his first press conference with the media, and talk about biting people at the kneecaps. But you're going to tell me that Eric Bieniemy didn't interview well? Go talk to the players that he coaches. Ask them how he commands a room. Ask them what impact he had on making them better players. I have asked Patrick Mahomes that question. I have asked Damian Williams that question back during the Super Bowl that they won. So I'm tired of that narrative. I have heard it from a GM who told me that, well, he didn't interview well. What does that mean? What does that mean? Because he doesn't have recall of a play from 2 years ago in a game, that means he doesn't interview well? Look, you're going to get me emotional on this because I'm sick of it.
It just goes to show the double standard. And I was talking about Jim Caldwell earlier. I mean, how much more successful do you have to be? You want to keep Eric Bieniemy from getting an opportunity. You want to keep Brian Leftwich from getting an opportunity because they have what? They don't have it. And what is it? Because Mr. Caldwell was able to get his team to a Super Bowl. He had multiple successful seasons, took a dying franchise and put life into him, got him to the playoffs a couple of times in a row. But that wasn't good enough. And
actually, the year the Ravens won their Super Bowl, he was the quarterback's coach for Joe Flacco, who had his best season that year.
So, look, there's always going to be reasons. And so it's important from a standpoint of trying to get equality, equal opportunity, to be able to look at the objective, look at the success. And oftentimes the success in terms of getting an opportunity comes from someone who is a successful coordinator. And if you look at the Chiefs under Bieniemy, come on. they've put up numbers that haven't been seen in a long time on the offensive side of the ball. They've been to four AFC championship games in a row. They've made 2 Super Bowls. And, they lost the other 2 that they didn't make. They lost in overtime. So, I mean, how much more success do you have to put up before you can get an opportunity as an African-American head coach? These things have to be tapped.
No question. And his 2 immediate predecessors in the same role that he is in both got head coaching jobs. And he doesn't. And I've written this, that my fear is that Eric Bieniemy has become this generation's Sherman Lewis. And Sherman Lewis, for those who don't know, was an assistant coach back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, long time, offensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers when they won a Super Bowl under Mike Holmgren, had been a coordinator with other clubs as well. But anyway, on that Packers team, 5 other coaches on that offensive squad ended up getting head coaching jobs. All of them were under Sherm Lewis. John Gruden was even a quality control guy. That's an entry-level position. He got a head coaching job. Sherm Lewis never got one. And again, when we talked earlier about mental health, when I was writing this story last year about this and talking to Byron and Eric, I reached out to Sherman Lewis multiple times, left him messages, never heard back, reached out to one of his close friends. And I said, I've called and left messages for Sherm a number of times. He won't call me back. And the friend said to me, it's possibly because it's too painful to talk about it again. So again, what is happening now, in my opinion, it has a lasting impact on these men. And I think that gets ignored in this process.
Can I ask you guys about just the idea of racial discrimination surrounding the lawsuit? Do you feel at all that whether or not race is attributable to these things, do you feel that it's polarizing in a sense? Now you have people arguing who's a racist, who's not a racist. It turns into a black and white issue for some people, not for all. But do you think that it hurts the ability to bring people to the table for solutions? Because now it's all controversial and scandalous. And, I was told by a lawyer, his name's Carl Douglas, you guys probably know him. He's gone on some radio programs and he said he thinks that it was just an ill-timed, ill-executed, I'm not going to say his exact words, but this is a paraphrase of the idea, lawsuit, because of the timing of when it was brought. And I'll have him on another time so he can say his piece. But, it's brought while Flores is up for 2 head coaching jobs. Now you've got other coaches in the league that were mentioned in the suit up for jobs. So that sort of has a chilling effect on whether they want to get involved in the lawsuit, because that could impact their ability to get their coaching positions. And then there's all this publicity surrounding racial discrimination and everything like that. I mean, what do you guys think is the most productive way to move this issue past the scandalous, the appetite for scandal, I should say, the idea of who's racist, who's not, people defending themselves against allegations of racism, and move it towards progress, actual progress, so it doesn't pass us by when we now have an opportunity for people to come to an understanding that can affect real change, hopefully.
But listen, as a civil rights lawyer, a lawsuit is invaluable in bringing change. I mean, let's just talk about the history of civil rights for a moment. Forget about the NFL. Let's just talk about something basic, like education. How about kindergarten students? How about students who are going to middle school and high school? There was a time not too long ago in our country where there was a separate but equal policy in place, where as long as there were 2 schools, one for whites, one for blacks, under the law in this country, it was permissible. It took a lawsuit. It took multiple people being hung, lynched, killed, churches being bombed and burned innocent people dying, being bit by dogs, hit with water cannons, and a lawsuit to bring about a change in the law so that there was no longer any separate but equal. Everyone was now allowed at least to be in the same school, to be able to use the same facilities. And so the only way that the NFL is going to change its policies, the only way the NFL is going to allow African Americans and other people of color, women, to be among the ranks of owners, people that run teams, people that coach teams, the only way that's going to happen is if there's a lawsuit forcing them to do it. We've seen historically that these owners are not going to do it without some legal pressure or without some type of punishment that will go along with their failure to give opportunity to people of color. And so from my perspective, the only way that you're going to get them to do it is to force them legally to do it. And it takes people who... Go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir. Finish your thought.
I was just going to say, without brave people like Mr. Flores, who's willing to put his career on the line, there is not going to be change. Or if there is change, it's only going to be window dressing. And so this cannot be allowed. We have to force the NFL to change. And so I leave it at that. I mean, I think from a historical perspective, you see that the only way to fight this type of discrimination, especially when you're dealing with a powerful corporation, is to litigate.
I would agree with that. Before you go, just
let me say this.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it a coincidence that there were 9 head coaching openings this year? None of the first 6 went to blacks. And the minute Brian Flores filed his lawsuit, the next week we had 2 black head coaches hired. Is that just a coincidence? No. History tells us.
Last though, like you said, without real discussions about things that, like Derek said, have to be implemented or forced by a court potentially to be implemented for the long term.
I mean, there are only 2 ways historically that we have seen real change in this league. And that's either through the threat of litigation or actual litigation, and the threat and actual implementation of sponsors pulling their money away from teams. When the late Johnnie Cochran and Cyrus Mary threatened to sue the NFL back in the early 2000s for discrimination in hiring practices towards head coaches, that's where the Rooney Rule came in. That's where we saw the number of black coaches increase. When we saw during the Washington football team scandal last year, sponsors say, we don't want to be associated with this team or this league, and threaten to pull their money, all of a sudden an owner who said, I will never change my team's racist name, changed the team name. And we saw all of a sudden the first black club president in league history. We saw a woman hired to one of the highest positions within a team in this league's history. So again, as Derek said, litigation or the threat of it is one of the proven ways that you make change in the NFL. And the other one, as I said, involves sponsors.
I just want to play your question, Jim, to Roger Goodell. I thought that was really, really very courageous of you, considering who you work for, the NFL. Can you guys all see this?
Yes.
You can see it and hear it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Out here, I'll ask you, as I always say, in your initial statement, the league's initial statement, it said that diversity, equity, and inclusion were core principles of the NFL. And I need to provide some context before I can ask you about that statement. In the 100-plus year history of this league, 24 of 32 franchises have either had one black head coach or no black head coaches. And to make sure I get the names right, I'll read them off here. We've got the Bills, the Commanders, the Cowboys, the Falcons, the Giants, the Jaguars, the Panthers, the Patriots, the Rams, the Ravens, the Saints, the Seahawks, the Titans, who have never had a black head coach. That's nearly half the league. We look at the fact that there's never been a majority black owner. There's only been one black club president. We look at the GMs, now we're up to 7. 5 of those were hired in the last 12 months. We're now at 3 black head coaches, 2 of whom were hired after Brian Flores filed his lawsuit. So it's easy to focus on the owners here, but I want to put this to you here. When we look at the league office, of the top 11 executives there are only 2 people of color. When we look at NFL Media Group, where I work, there is not one black person at the senior level in the newsroom who makes decisions about a league whose player population is 70% black. So as a member of the media group and as a black man, I ask, why does the NFL and its owners have such a difficult time at the highest levels hiring black people into decision-making positions?
Yeah, Jim, listen, we look at the same numbers, and they're really part of the effort that, again, looking at how do we become more effective in our policies and procedures. We work really hard. We believe in diversity. We believe in it as a value. We believe it's made it stronger. People who've come into the league who are diverse have been very successful and made us better. And we just have to do a better job. We have to look, is there another thing that we can do to make sure we're attracting that best talent here and making our league inclusive? If I had the answer right now, I would give it to you. I would have implemented. I think what we have to do is just continue and find and look and step back and say, we're not doing a good enough job here. We need to find better solutions and better outcomes. And so let's find more effective policies. Let's make sure everyone understands. Let's make sure that we're looking at diversity and actually incentivizing that for everybody in our building, including with compensation. Let's make sure that when we're dealing with vendors outside the building, we're hiring diverse vendors and bringing them in and giving them an opportunity to succeed, just like we do with white vendors or people of color. Well, how can they come in and contribute to the NFL? So I think it's not a single answer, Jim. The single responsibility comes on all of us in the NFL, and we have to be the ones that make that change. And we are the ones that have to make sure we bring diversity deeper into our NFL and make the NFL an inclusive and diverse organization that allows everyone the opportunity to be successful.
Jim, I just want to say real quick, just from a journalism perspective, when I was in college, I went to Boston University, and I used to go across the river to Harvard because they always had really important people there. You know, they had world leaders and politicians, and I was probably the only college-age kid usually in the crowd. But I would go there as a journalism student for the opportunity to ask that question at the end, where I could get up and ask a really powerful person a really, really difficult question. And you did that, but you did that also you're working for the NFL. Like it's one thing to do something like that when you there? I lost you for a second. It's one thing to do something like that when you're just a journalist outside of the organization. But I just have to give you like so much credit for doing what every journalist fantasizes about doing, but few actually take that leap in their careers when they get in the position to do it. And you really capitalized on that. So good for you. I think he's coming back on. I think he missed my whole tribute to his journalism, but.
Well, here's what I'll say why Jim gets his connection. When we look at solutions, the one thing that I talked about, on my show, and Derek, you can help me with this, is that there is a players' union. Maybe it's time that the coaches had their union, and I know the idea is anytime you introduce a union, the corporation thinks, okay, well, that's an opportunity for maybe a labor dispute, but what they've done thus far isn't working. So in the idea of introducing a union, you can have a subcommittee. Tony Dungy could be on this committee. Jim Caldwell, other coaches who have coached in this league could be on that committee. And basically their job is to evaluate the coaches every single year to make sure that both white and black coaches have an equal balance. So during the evaluation process, based on what you did the previous year or over the years, you move up to the top of the list when it comes to those vacancies that we see every other year. And usually there's 5 vacancies. So that's where you're choosing the best of the best, and you're not choosing guys based on the color of their skin. And Derek, you work with in a lot of labor unions. Do you think that this is a point where we will be able to get across, or the owners would at any point agree to having a coaches union?
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point. And one of the things that I was hoping would happen is that the players themselves, 70% of whom are black in the NFL, would get together and use their collective power to make change. And something that you just suggested, where you have sort of an impartial panel of evaluators, coach evaluators, who would make recommendations about which coaches should get which jobs. I think that's an excellent solution. And the reason it's excellent is because if the players insist on it, and if the owners do not do it, then the players have the ability to hit the owners where it hurts the most, and that's in their pocketbook. They can refuse to play. And if they refuse to play, all of a sudden, those billions of dollars are not going to be funneled into these owners' pockets. And so the players themselves can actually have a very huge impact on how to address these systemic issues of racism. And hopefully the players will get together and figure out a way that they can control this narrative, or at least they can contribute to this narrative. So it's no longer an issue where the coaches are decided only by the owners. And so
Derek,
you raised a great issue, and I think that is something that should definitely be looked at.
I did a webinar recently with a couple of players, Kelvin Beachum, offensive lineman with the Cardinals, Jason McCourty, a safety with the Dolphins, and also Colts GM Chris Ballard was on there. And I specifically said to the players, what is the role of the player in this debate about the lack of diversity among head coaches? And Kelvin Beachum said to me, and Jason McCourty signed off on it, that it begins with the quarterbacks because they are the face of the league. And if they are to step up and say something, then the other players will fall in line. But Kelvin felt that non-quarterbacks, particularly, as some might say, grunt players like offensive linemen, don't carry the cachet to move the needle on this issue. And I found that kind of interesting because I remember going back to the labor negotiation in 2011. And I said to a quarterback, who I won't mention his name because it was a private conversation, but I said to him, why aren't more quarterbacks involved in the labor negotiation? Because if you guys got involved and lent your voice to this discussion, it could move the needle in your favor. And this quarterback said to me, you're right, but you have to understand we have relationships with owners that go beyond the field when our playing days are over. And so basically what he was telling me, that he wasn't going to hurt his pocketbook to try and fight for something for the other players. And I'm not saying that's all players or even that's all quarterbacks, but that is something that is real, in this discussion. Because as you said, I believe players could be very powerful in this discussion and could lead to change. But the NFL understands, just like in a labor negotiation, that many of these players, as strange as it may sound, and many fans won't believe it, but they live paycheck to paycheck. And so they're not going to jeopardize putting food on their table or money in their pockets for something that they say. Many of them will tell you they never had a black head coach coming up. through the ranks. So it is not a real issue with them. And that's not me. I'm just explaining what I have heard from these players. So Nick would know better than me, being a former player, what that's like. But I'm just telling you my experience from talking to these players.
Jim, I know you have to hop off. Can you just tell me real quick, and then I want to hear Nick's response to that, and then Derek too, of course. Jim, what did you think of Roger Goodell's answer to you? Were you satisfied with it? Do you feel that he was authentic? Like, are you going to stay on top of him? What's next? Because that was an incredible question, right? But this is more about a performance. It's about actual results, right?
Yeah, no, I never expected to get an answer. I've done enough of these press conferences that I know what I tried to do and spent the lead up to that doing is trying to structure my question in such a way that I gave him as little wiggle room as possible. But he was well prepped and he stayed on message and he didn't answer it. He stayed to his talking points. And I expected that. Doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to ask these questions. I am. And again, I'm 58. I've been doing it a while. And if it ends up costing me my job, I'll find another job. You know, I'm not worried about it. I just think it's more important to give a voice to these men who don't have a voice or who can't use their voice for fear of retribution.
I'll answer it this way as a guy that both played in the league and coached in the league. And I have several guys that I played with or played against who have taken that path to become coaches. Like Jim said earlier, a lot of those guys behind closed doors, they're very outspoken about what's happened, especially what's happened to Coach Flores. But a lot of those guys are not going to come and have their voices heard publicly because they're afraid of having some kind of repercussions because they spoke out, because they know that these things are happening. I mean, as a guy that did 5 coaching internships in NFL without ever receiving a job, and it wasn't until my former teammate, John Lynch, became the GM of the 49ers that my opportunity, the doors were open for me, but it shouldn't have to take that. There are more qualified guys who played this game than some of the guys that didn't. But the one thing that we continue to hear, and especially I heard a lot, was that former players don't want to work. And when I asked several coaches who told me that, where did that come from? No one has the answer. They just know that that is disseminated throughout the league. So before we even get to the application process or even have an opportunity to get on the field to show what we can do from a teaching standpoint, we're already behind the 8 ball because the idea is that we don't want to work. So we are shoved down to the lower levels of football operation. And then some guys have bowed out and they say, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. They made it so difficult for me to move up. And I really love teaching guys and I love passion. I'm passionate about the game itself. So what is there left for me to do? So they walk away and we lose those minority coaches, those minority leaders who can help these guys both on and off the field. So I'm hoping somehow, I don't know, maybe Troy Vincent and his voice being the vice president of football operations, maybe he can try to convince them to change some of these policies to give us the opportunities that we know that, we deserve, we've earned, and we can do just as good of a job as anyone else.
Derek. Sorry.
Yeah. So one of the points that Jim made about his conversations with players, where some of their concerns relate to how it's going to affect them financially. I mean, look, that's just a reality of life. I mean, people always need to be able to put food on the table for themselves, for their families, and so that's a legitimate concern that goes into a decision about whether or not you're going to sit out, whether or not you're going to, strike or boycott games. And so I don't mean to make that any small consideration. But, as Johnny used to always say, to whom much is given, much is expected. And to the extent that players might suffer some financially, they have to look at what is going to be in their best interest long term, And what are they going to be remembered for? You know, what are they going to be remembered for? What did you stand up for when you had the opportunity to stand up? You look at historically, again, you look at some of the boycotts that were led by Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., where people, instead of taking the bus, they found ways to get to work otherwise, you know, because they didn't want to have to continue riding on the back of the bus. And so even though it was a hardship for them financially, physically, where some folks, you know, they chose to walk. Some folks, you know, they carpooled. They lost money in order to make their way to work, just so they can avoid having to take the bus and being on the back of the bus. And it made a difference. And so for these players, one of the questions I would ask them is, what do you want to be remembered for? You know, when you look at the concussion settlement, for example, you know, these players who suffered tremendously, you know, head injuries and the CTE that we know is now going on. The league tried to hide that from players for so long. And now when you have a concussion settlement, the league wants to make African-American players get less money because they came into the game with less mental acuity. I mean, that's what this league has done. This is what the league thinks of African-American players. And so how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as someone who just got used and abused and then thrown to your you know, whatever? Or do you want to say, hey, we stood up for something that is going to last beyond us, and we hope to make other generations better and have an equal opportunity to succeed at all levels of this game? And so I think that is really what needs to, you know, happen. The players need to understand that, yes, it might cause a financial hardship in the short run, but long term, they're going to be remembered more for their sacrifice in making change than they will be, many of them, for their careers.
Thank you guys so much. Jim, you have to hop right now, right?
Yeah, I do. I want to thank you guys for including me. So as Derek says, that there is no progress without sacrifice. So I always try and leave them with that. So thank you for having me. I got to run. I got an assignment.
We'll come back and we'll keep talking about this with more people. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I have to jump off too. I really thank you for giving me the opportunity. But I have a court appearance that I have to make virtually, of course. But
we're going to come back. We didn't even get to touch on the Rooney Rule. We'll come back and talk about that. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate you.
Right.
Thank you, Derek.
Okay, thank you. Take care, Nick. Bye-bye.
So, Nick, hold on. Let me just...
Yes.
So, Nick, I think we'll end it in a minute, but I want to get your sort of like quick summary of that. And I want to ask you kind of a difficult question, because I see it in the comments from somebody, and they said, you know, I watch sports for the enjoyment only. So selfishly, I don't want to hear about this, although I don't want to hear about it, although I know these gentlemen are 100% correct. He wants to come on. His name is John Davis. Should we have him on? I mean, I'm curious to hear this, because you know what? I think, and we could do this real quick, but I think, and I hear this a lot on social media, especially, people are not affected. This is not their life, right? They watch sports for the fun of it, and they don't want to deal with the political, social, you know, work environment, cultural, whatever it is. They want to watch the sports, and that's it. They don't want to hear these discussions, unfortunately. Listen, that's the reality of it. So now John Davis is knocking. I'm curious what you have to say to him. You know, I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, obviously, it's an important issue. It's an important platform. But there's a lot of people that feel that way. That's just the reality. So it's like, what's the answer for those people? Let's have him on real quick. We only have about 1 minute. So it's kind of cool to be able to bring in these different perspectives. I think it's important. All right. Are you in here, John? There's John. Okay. Hi, John.
How are
So you
y'all
have like,
doing?
good. You have about like 20, 30 seconds because we're running over, but I want to hear your point of view so we can respond to that because I think that's important.
You know, it's like I said in my comments, it's 100% selfish. It's an escapism to watch, you know, these phenomenal athletes play, to go to a movie. You don't want to get bombarded every day on the truth. And that's the problem, that I think it's a perception. I think it's in the, you know, I'm not a black guy. I don't know these things, but you know, it's from an outsider seeing it, you hear these truths and you don't want to be bombarded with it. So it's a messaging thing. It's not that people are not on your side. We're 100% sympathetic. I could care less who's coaching the team, what color. And I hate that there's so many guys like Flores, who just got released from the Dolphins. I thought he was a wonderful coach. And so you're like, how do you make sense of it? So how do y'all make sense of it?
Well, John, thank you for that, and thank you for your truth. Most people look at sports and entertainment as a way to escape the rigors of their daily lives. So sometimes they don't want to be bombarded by some of the social issues. But I say, well, from the beginning of time, we've had these issues before. You go back to Jesse Owens in the Olympics. You go and you talk about John Carlos, Tommy Smith, and the Olympics themselves, trying to bring awareness to the things that were happening back in their city of Los Angeles, but no one really wants to hear it because they just want to focus on the sports and entertainment. To me, you can't have one without the other because we're still talking about people. When I look at horse racing and how some of the horses are treated, most people will say, well, they're just animals, they're just horses. I'm like, no, these are athletes that I consider like myself, but no one gives them the level of respect because they are animals and they can't speak up for themselves. But in this case, as athletes, we are people. Yes, there's a substantial amount of money that we do make as athletes, but we have inherent issues that we go through that most people and most fans don't know. And my mom always said, well, you know, don't judge a person until you walk them out in their shoes. And you can't. And I understand your viewpoint, and we deal with the same thing here in Denver on my show, Nick and Cecil here at 104.3 The Fan. We have people call in and say, well, listen, I am just here for the sports. I don't want to hear about the social activities or the things that are happening in our society. But I'm like, this is a part of us. I mean, this affects us emotionally and our families. So this is something that we have to talk about. And if I don't talk about them as a host, who will? And I'm like you, and I said it the other night on my show, I am sick of the Rooney Rule. I am over the fact that we are even having this conversation in 2022. The only thing that should matter is, here's a coach. Can he coach? I don't care about his skin color, whatever. Can he coach? But there's been so much of a disparity over the years in the NFL. This is why we're constantly having these conversations. And this is going to be up to Roger Goodell and the 32 owners to figure out the proper way to handle this, or it's not going to go away.
Can I just say two things real quick? One thing is, I think that there is a value to the conversation for the entertainment, because if you're passing over people who are better coaches, think about
I think they
how
are.
much more entertaining the sport would be if you had those coaches. You don't know what the game would be like with that coach if he's black and more qualified than a white coach that's less qualified. So really the entertainment value could be boosted by just making sure not necessarily that we have X number of white, X number of black, but that we have the right qualified people there. But the other thing I'll say to you is, it's very funny to me because there's a couple people that tuned in today. You're one of them, but you're saying, I don't want to be here and listen to this. And that's really interesting to me because you're here for a reason and you're on the screen for a reason. So I think people do care. I think people feel that there's nothing they can do about it. I think people feel, you know, well, I want to watch the entertainment because I'm hearing, but like, okay, what am I supposed to do about it? Because people can't get involved in the conversation. There's no one saying, well, here's a problem. If this is something you think is right, if this is something you care about, here are some actions you can take to make your voice known or to make progress. And guess what? I brought you on. Do you feel at all more interested or invested now that you're part of the discussion? I'm just curious.
No, it's okay. So maybe it's should I say, it's sad that we're having this conversation and that I have to hear about it. It's not that, yeah, I don't want to really hear about it, but it's just mainly that it's sad that we have this conversation. Yeah. And then I look at corporate America, and I look at where my son is, who's 26, and the framework of the business that he works in is so diversified. When me being 59 years old, then when it was the white corporate America, I feel like the NFL, and I hate that I'm 59 years old. I wish I was y'all's age, and it could be part of it, but I still feel like that the framework of the NFL is still my era, so to speak, although I was very diverse area. But the point is how does that guard change to become more reflective of even what corporate America is nowadays? That's what I think you're dealing with, not necessarily that it's the old white guard. And I hate saying that. And that's the way I feel with it. I feel like it's this me against you type stuff coming from them. And until that structure doesn't change, the battle uphill is even steeper. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me.
And I'm not trying to say it's the good old white boys club. It is, but it kind of looks like that and smells like it and tastes like that. And it's the old litmus test.
Well, I think it's interesting because you see your son working with people who are getting opportunities, and it's like, what if your child, were in this other environment, and you're saying, well, that's not fair because everybody else over here gets to have a fair shot. We're making progress over here, but my child is passionate about over here, and it's not where it's supposed to be right now. It's like you're saying, 20, 30 years in the olden days, and it's archaic. So I think it's interesting.
Perhaps because it's ownership, not corporate structure, where corporate structure they may be 10 years behind social structure, but ownership structure, that divide may be just wider. And I think that perhaps the messaging would help a lot of folks saying, because I'll guarantee you, if everybody was on here, everybody would probably say, yeah, I agree 100% with these gentlemen that it's wrong, that there are better people, that there's, from a business standpoint, don't you want the best person, regardless of color, race, sex or whatever, to be leading your organization, to be, providing entertainment, everything that you're looking for in a company when you want that. And I think everybody that's from the business, yeah, 100%, but it just doesn't happen.
Well, because I think that corporate America relies on the apathy of people who don't have a way to get involved. And they then have to choose, well, I love the sport, but I don't love what this organization stands for in terms of hiring. But I'm not going to stop watching the sport that I love. It shouldn't have to be a choice, right? You should be able to say, okay, I love this sport. I'm going to watch it for its entertainment value, but I'm also going to join my brethren over here and have a voice. And the organization can hear my voice and tell them what I think, they should represent. So, Nick, do you want to close? Because we have to log off, but I appreciate this perspective very much.
Well, I appreciate John Davis for tuning in and also sharing his input on this subject matter. And John, I wish other people thought the same way that you thought or are thinking right now, and we can come together and just kind of mend the fences where it has nothing to do with race or anything like that. It just has a lot to do with having equality and being able to go out there and compete, because everyone wants to compete. But thank you for joining us. I appreciate your words and your truth. And maybe you can carry forward that, after having a conversation with us, and have this with other individuals. So now they can still enjoy the game, but still maybe ask these questions. So thank you again, John, for tuning in.
Thanks for having me. Good luck, and I'm supporting.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All right, y'all too.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick. I think this was pretty productive. I love getting at least one person's viewpoint. I would love I feel like if, the more we do this, the more people will tune in, and soon we'll have to be picking and choosing who we hear from, unfortunately.
Well, I think it was all important to have John on, because like he said, he is a consumer of the sport, but he doesn't want to hear all the outside noise. but
Right.
also to get his true feelings kind of, I guess, verbalized or articulated. We got a chance to really see his point and knowing as though he wasn't just an individual who said, I just want my sports, or as though it's been said to football players and basketball players before, just shut up and dribble. So
Right.
his approach was a little different. So I'm glad we were able to have him on.
Yeah, because he's representative of a lot of people. And I think that's
absolutely.
It's not just him. A lot of people feel that way. So, all right, this was awesome. Thanks for joining me, Nick. So hopefully we'll just keep continuing this conversation with really great guests that can give us the insight like today.
Well, thank you for having me, Amy. And yes, this conversation is not gone to bed. There's still more to discuss.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank